Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba.
Got any change?
Welcome to the pod, people.
Looking for a good time?
Here are the boys. We're back in town. You know who it is. I had something for this, and then I lost it. Matisse Van Rossum.
I'm the doctor, Cleveland Mosier.
I'm Ben Sheets, but you can call me Zorro.
Oh, man, Guido Freddie Mercury. That's who I was. But, you know, I biffed it already. But, yeah, we're here, and we're talking about Frankenhooker. This is Ben's pick of the week.
Yeah, so after The Vanishing, I thought we should mix it up a little bit and go with something much different.
The next week we're doing, like, a Fritz Lang from the 40s. I'm going to get whiplash. Like, God.
Oh, man. No, I always like picking movies that I feel like are a little under-recognized. I feel like if we just talked about classics...
This one under-recognized might be the right word. Buried might be the right word.
But yeah, so Frankenhooker is a 1990 movie directed by Frank Henenlotter from movies like Basket Case and Brain Damage. Really master in terms of 80s and 90s schlock movies.
Yeah, good old sexploitation.
Yeah, and so this movie is about our main character, whose name is... What is his first name?
Frank.
No, that's his
No.
last name. His last name is Franken, because...
Frankenhooker.
Yeah.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, Jeffrey Franken, who his wife Elizabeth is savagely killed in a freak lawnmower accident.
You know, one of those freak lawnmower accidents.
So he decides to remake her. He is an amateur electrobiologist, I think they said.
I guess.
And he saves her head, and he goes out and rebuilds her using parts from prostitutes on the streets of New York. Things go a little awry from there, you could say. It plays off the classic...
only from there, though. They weren't already going awry.
It plays off the classic Frankenstein story and gives it an interesting twist.
There's a number of things I did enjoy about this movie, but one thing I absolutely did enjoy was the premise. Like, the idea of recontextualizing Frankenstein in Jersey in the modern day is pretty funny to me.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just going like just trashy Frankenstein is funny. Like, and it was just alone was enough to get giggles out of me. Like, as soon as you hear the accents in the movie,
The main character has an excellent accent, too.
oh, everybody does. Like, it's thick and it's very genuine and authentic. And oh god, it's funny. It's very funny.
Yeah, so this movie plays off a lot of those B-movie, styles. It reminds me in a lot of ways of like a trauma movie, in that it's very much a B-movie, very over the top. It plays into the sexploitation genre a lot too, obviously, for a movie called Frankenhooker.
Oh yeah, no, it's just
It's
straight up
gonna-
sexploitation film.
Which, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I think, in a way, Henenlotter does a good job making all of the characters feel like of the world and like they belong in the world. So even when you get the scenes where Jeffrey is looking at all these hookers' body parts to figure out what body parts he wants, the hookers are making fun of Jeffrey. And, they don't seem like just idiot hookers that are being used and thrown out. I think more than anything, I want to kind of relate this movie to a movie that had come out 4 or 5 years beforehand, Weird Science, the John Hughes movie, where two nerds build a perfect woman with their computer and bring her to life. And it's this like sex symbol, Kelly LeBrock in the cut off shirt and everything. And this movie takes that concept of reducing women to the body parts and flips it on its head in a really interesting way. I want to dissect that a little bit more.
Right. The film is particularly unique in the fact that it has multiple scenes that are kind of can be viewed almost as feminist, but the movie itself is very much so a sexploitation film. So it kind of hits you from both ends on that front, which I thought was interesting. Like, it does have like an appeal for like legalizing prostitution. It has like
I would be careful in the generalization that sexploitation as a genre is inherently anti-feminist.
Yeah,
because I think that plays into the idea that sex is only used as a means of objectifying women.
It's a very sex negative way of looking at it.
Right, you're right. No, which is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the film, there are also, like, with the exploding hookers and whatnot, like, hilariously misogynistic moments in this film. And so it hits you from both ends on that front. You're right. I should be clarifying. I shouldn't be saying the movie is a sexploitation film, and it has moments that are both feminist and also sexist in it. And sexist and sexploitation are not correlative.
Yeah.
Yes. Cool. Yeah, and I agree. But yes, the film again just hits you from both ends. It has one or two like revelations in the film that can be viewed as feminist, but then you have exploding fucking hookers and whatnot. Like it's so goofy and it's full TNA and it's all male gazy and whatnot. Like
there's a lot of the male gaze stuff. I agree with that for sure. Yeah. But I also think
it's like male gaze to the point of laser vision.
I also think that it sets up a lot of the misogyny as a platform to destroy it by the end of the film. All of the particularly misogynistic characters meet their end at the hands of female characters.
Yes, it's true. Like, there is a punishment.
Or rather, they meet their end because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, there's really only two of those characters. There's Jeffrey, who obviously wants to rebuild his girlfriend as the perfect woman using various body parts of hookers, sort of like a jigsaw puzzle of sexiness. And then the pimp, who he gets involved with,
Zorro,
who is maybe one of the worst film actors I've ever seen in my life.
He's hilarious.
Easily one of my favorites.
It's really fucking funny.
He's like absurdly buff. He has a face like Freddie Mercury.
He's Guido Freddie Mercury.
And because his name is and he has a big like metallic Z on his necklace,
gold medallion.
Yeah. So I call him Freddie Mercury Z.
But they, especially Zorro, like, he is very much undone at the end because of his desire to possess these women who he pimps out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this film hits a weird mark for me because while yes, like the climactic message of this film is, it can be viewed as feminist. The whole road we take to get there is.
See, I don't even think the road we take to get there is all that misogynistic. I think there is a lot of male gaze, but I don't see it in too much of a sex negative way. I think a lot of it is pretty sex positive. I mean, they, like I said before, they don't look down on these characters really too much. I think the only thing that you could consider that is with the super crack, but I think that serves a purpose in the movie to show how women are controlled.
Well, see, here's the tricky part for me, is like, I did feel like the women were sort of portrayed as like bimbos, but the problem is that literally everyone in this film is portrayed as an idiot. Intentionally, like for comedic value. Like everyone in this film is a moron. And
absolutely.
It's that, like slapsticky kind of schlocky vibe. So it's sort of hard to say on that front. So I definitely don't think that like the women in this movie were viewed in any worse of a way than the men. Like no one was
I think that's the biggest thing.
I can agree with that. I do think that though the super crack scene is probably my favorite part of the movie.
Same.
The hooker party, these women are very much portrayed as cartoonishly obsessed with crack.
Yes.
In a not super flattering light.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, though, everybody in this movie is unlikable in some respect or just downright stupid. So it doesn't come across as like overly exploitative of, or like it has a message about a specific type of person or individual. So I don't consider it really problematic in that sense, but I don't know if you could really say that this kind of movie is like a triumph of feminism or anything like that.
Absolutely not.
I think it works within the genre very well. In terms of B movies, in terms of sexploitation, this is one of the better, if not one of the best.
I mean, it does what it sets out to do. You know, like its title is Frankenhooker, and you get that. Like, and that's for sure.
Man, okay, I've seen this movie before. It's been a really long time, but I was kind of disappointed that it did not do as much for me on this watch as it did on the last one. And I think that I just couldn't stop comparing it to Reanimator, which is a nearly perfect film in my opinion. And considering that this movie didn't even come out that many years after Reanimator, in a lot of ways it kind of feels like a knockoff, and it never gets to quite the level of outrageousness that like a trauma film does. It gets close, but it doesn't quite push those boundaries far enough that it is, you know, something truly insane and outlandish, like something like Terror Firmer, which we've talked about on the show, or Mother's Day, or you know, any of those other trauma films. And it's just like, it's sort of in like this gray land where it's just like I it has so many things that I like about it, but it ultimately leaves me wanting so much more from it, and it just made me want to watch Reanimator.
Yeah, like my issue with it is like it didn't. It did kind of hit a middle, an odd middle ground for me between like a movie that is legitimate, that is honestly bad, and a movie that's trying to be bad. It felt try-hardy at times, like for how hard it wanted to be bad, and then other times like it landed. But a lot of times like the badness lands, and like it works and it's funny. The biggest problem that I had with this film was probably the lead. I definitely would have preferred like more of like the monster, more of like Frankenhooker monster.
Yeah, you know, there's not really any actual Frankenhooker until like over halfway
the third act.
through the film,
and,
which I do think is kind of disappointing.
And she's by far the best part about it, but also just the lead is just unbelievably flat.
I actually really like the lead. I think he does his best Jeffrey Combs from Reanimator, but he has that New Jersey accent, and his deadpan, mumbling, bumbling idiot kind of demeanor works for me in the movie.
I wish it did for me.
He's a bumbling creep idiot
so flat. Like,
throughout the movie.
I get the creep part of it, but in such a vibrant movie where it's so messy, and all the effects are just so outlandish, and it's a camp on camp on camp that I would just want a little bit more like color from like the lead, and it's just his readings are so flat. Like,
my problem with him is that he's too one note. In the first half, I didn't have a problem with him being sort of the straight man where everything is so flat and he's surrounded by all of these much more outwardly colorful characters, to the extent that it feels intentional in, you know, like the first half of the film, but by the end it started to feel more like that's all that he can do. Like, it's not intentional, that is just what he is capable of. When it's time for him to become a more colorful character, like, for God fucking sakes, this movie is a fucking Frankenstein adaptation, and we never get It's Alive.
It's alive!
You know,
we never get anything like that.
Regardless of him playing the straight man for most of the movie, something like that to show, you know, some difference in his character.
Yeah, and like the Jersey thing, like, could have been really enhanced to do, hey, Ma, it's alive!
Have him truly be the Guido mad scientist. By the second half, I think would have been really great, and by the second half, his his sort of deadpan flatness, it starts to feel like, oh, he just can't act. That's all.
Right, and like there are a lot of times where like people are exploding around him, and he's just like, oh no, oh dear. He becomes sort of like a
it's
like
not
a vacuum.
what I want from a Dr. Frankenstein character.
The deadpan delivery actually worked for me a little bit because I think having it, in comparison to how bright everything else was, kind of made everything else a little brighter. It grounded it just enough without making it too flat, I think, for his stuff, just because his reactions were pretty good for the most part. The mumbling had some great moments in it, when he's drawing out the schematics on the image and the body,
the credits.
and he's mumbling like E=mc squared and stupid shit like that.
That's my point exactly.
Well, is the writing
in the first half that stuff is great, but by the time he has successfully created his Frankenhooker girlfriend, there's
no arc. Yeah, he's just still flat.
Then the flatness and the straight man doesn't work anymore.
Well, I think once Frankenhooker comes out, Frankenhooker is overshadowing everything else in the movie, period. Like that becomes the main central character, and he's kind of tossed aside. He literally gets knocked out by her immediately.
I mean,
but that still doesn't like change the fact that his character doesn't arc, like that he doesn't shift and that he doesn't respond to the world around him differently. Like he still remains flat during those latter sequences.
Well, that's his undoing ultimately, and that's part of
what his
point
bad
of the
acting
movie.
is his undoing.
No, the fact that he doesn't change. The fact that he doesn't change is what causes him to get killed ultimately.
Well, his mentality, like his sexist views don't change, but like
that doesn't have to change, but his actual performance, I think, is what
and his characterization,
really,
like in other fronts,
what really lacks an arc in a disappointing way, to the extent that it takes me out of the movie. Because, if anything, the Frankenhooker character, who is so over the top, should be an excuse for him to become more over the top and play off of her and let them, let them shine together, rather than just, I just don't like seeing him anymore. Like, he's the protagonist. He's who I've spent most of the film with, and I enjoy him for the first half of the movie, up past the super crack scene, which I think his deadpan delivery during that scene when he's fucking, like, he's got all these hookers in a hotel room and he's dressed as a doctor, and like the cartoonish doctor with the lab coat and the big glasses and like the reflective thing on his forehead, and he's measuring leg diameters and like taking calipers to titties and stuff like that. In that scene, the deadpan stuff is great because it plays as a perfect foil to the hookers, but it's just then it stops feeling like an intentionally deadpan character, and it just starts feeling like this actor has one note that he can play, and he doesn't know how to adapt to what's happening in the film. I mean, and it takes me out of it.
Even up through like that sequence, for me, like I was sort of finding it problematic. Because there's a lot of times where you can practically see him reading his lines off camera. He came across as very amateurish to me. Like his acting ability was weak. It didn't come across as flat, like just on like a monotone level, but just as from an inexperienced level. And again, it's Frankenhooker. I wasn't expecting like a masterpiece theater, like episode or anything like that. But I just wanted a little vibrance. But and I don't think, like, I get what you're saying, Ben, about like him existing like as contrast for the rest, but my problem is that it felt less like contrast and more like a void, like, and it was detracting and sucking away from the vibrancy of the other characters, and he was acting almost like as an emotional black hole because his reads were just so flat because he was just trying to memorize his lines. I kind of agree with that too, because like in something like this, I'm not looking for good acting. Fucking Zorro is just an absolutely god-awful actor, but it's funny. Whereas Jeffrey, at a certain point, is not
acting badly in a funny way. It's just so one note when I need him to play a different note. And I just don't care when he's on camera, and I want to see more of Frankenhooker and more of Zorro. And it's just like, well, I've stopped giving a shit about my protagonist, and that's a little bit of a problem. I mean, the set pieces do a lot to save that. I mean, especially like once Frankenhooker knocks him out and escapes and goes into the city on her quest for Johns.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like
Yeah.
there's not a ton of other scenes with just him after that. You know, most of it is focused on Frankenhooker after that point. You get a couple of scenes of him, you know, running out to the city, you know, frantically trying to find her, and like yelling at like the crazy apocalypse guy on the street, for example, stuff like that, you know. But most of that stuff is pretty small in comparison to the amount of screen time we get with Frankenhooker. Thankfully, because Frankenhooker is introduced so late, which I do think is a bit of a problem. I agree with that.
I would like Frankenhooker
But
to be introduced after like the first act.
I do think
Yeah.
that once she is introduced, they use her the majority of the time, which I think is perfect for what it is.
Well, they have to. People want their monies back.
Yeah, honestly,
because
like,
there's not much left in the movie. They have to use her most of the time.
I would love. I wish Frankenhooker became a thing after like the first act instead of the second act. Like, I could do away with a lot of the stuff of him like having the spaghetti dinner with her.
Oh, it wasn't
her
even
severed head.
spaghetti dinner. It was
just
wine and
cheese pizza.
pizza leftovers, 3-day-old
right.
pizza, which I thought was funny. I thought the fact
I
that
thought it was-
he made
I mean,
a
there's-
fancy dinner with reheated pizza.
I think
Like,
the
there's some
gags
funny-
and the
there's some
ideas
funny
were
gags,
good. I
but-
think again it's the execution. I thought it was flat. I think that the gags are really good. I think that the writing, there were a couple of times where it was fairly bothersome. Again, it's Frankenhooker like picking it
Man,
apart. It's not
I
really
found
worth
the
it,
writing
but
fun though.
there was one part where he's talking to his mom. This happens. There are two monologues that he has in this movie where the writing consisted of like, okay, this person has to have a monologue, and he just says the same thing 6 times over, and I counted where like he says like, I feel so isolated. I feel like I'm the only person left in the world. I feel like, and it goes on like that, and I was like counting it up, and I was like, he said it 6 times, like he's just said it differently, like, but it's the same thing. Like,
the thing I loved about that scene is he's bumbling on and on about his problem and essentially talking in circles, like you were saying. But
Like
what
broken
kills
record.
me with that is his mom's response, which without, you know, she takes a beat and then she goes, "Do you want a sandwich?"
yeah, which is very funny. Like, and that's my thing. Like, is it would have been funnier, like, if his monologue had been a little bit more impactful and powerful, like, than a flat delivery, like a shitty delivery. That line, the mom's line, would have been even funnier. Like, if he'd been like, you know, this is just all that's left in the world for me. I'm so vacuous. Everything is lost forever. You want a sandwich? Like,
See,
it's funnier that way. Like,
I don't know if I agree. I think having him being bumbling rather than being smart or well-spoken works better for the movie, because he is an idiot, you know?
Bumbling and obnoxious, though. Like, and again, just like repeating the same words is just obnoxious.
I mean, he didn't repeat the same exact thing. He was just talking in circles, like I said, and that's what a lot of people do. I mean, we even do it sometimes on the podcast.
Sure, but we edit. And it's a different format.
I really like how he starts drilling into his own skull.
Oh
Yeah.
he just like
He's start drilling into his own brain to relax himself.
Some weird ass phrenology.
Yeah,
I thought that was funny.
That shit I think is really funny. Where he's like, I'm so anxious. I need to calm down. He goes to like a mock up brain that's got a bunch of pins. And he's like, oh yeah, this should be the spot. And he just takes a power drill and drills into his own head.
just trepanates. Just
yeah,
like,
just
all right,
trepanate.
cool.
Yeah, that shit I thought was really fucking funny. That stuff is good. Like, Jeffrey works for me for like the first half of the film, and then he works until he doesn't. I feel like I'm a middle ground between the two of you. Like, he didn't bother me off the bat like he did to you, Cleve, but he definitely doesn't do it for me by the end of the film. but fortunately there are other characters that make him not as frustrating, I guess.
Well, yeah, and fortunately too, like those were. I think that's the sum of any problems I had with this film. Everything else I enjoyed thoroughly, so we can get into the fun stuff. But that's all. It's all off my chest.
I love the super crack scene.
Yes, we should talk about that. Well, in general, the effects in this movie I found super fun.
Yeah.
Tons of foam,
Lots of good practical
tons of
effects.
practicals. You know, not a ton of blood. That was actually intentional, I believe. I was reading that apparently they had a really hard time keeping this from being NC-17 because that NC-17 rating had just started in 1990 when this movie came out, and the ratings board with the movie called Frankenhooker were being particularly harsh on it. That paired with the fact that it was a low budget indie movie made it especially hard. So they had to be careful with some of the more violent scenes.
That's interesting. I honestly, while I was watching it, I didn't think about the lack of blood, but you're absolutely right. There's a lot of death, but there's not much actual blood. And I also find it surprising that it's the blood that would have pushed it into NC-17 and not the excessive tits and ass.
Yeah, and I mean, it is what it is, I guess. I thought the effects were great. I mean, from the opening of the movie, the first shot we get basically is Jeffrey working on this brain with an eye in it, like floating in purple Kool-Aid.
It just reminds me of a miniature mother brain from Metroid.
True.
Yeah.
Like, no, I like kudos to the film like on the opener. I thought it was very funny how he's
the
just
opening's great.
He's just working on this brain like in the middle of which we also found out it like isn't even his house. Like,
yeah, no, exactly. It's his girlfriend's
friend's
house because he's at her dad's birthday.
Yeah, their birthday barbecue, and he's just in the middle of the
house
kitchen
with like a car battery hooked up to an eyeball brain and just like poking at it and shit. And his girlfriend's mom comes up and is like, "Jeffrey, can you pass the ketchup?" And he just has the ketchup like entangled in all the wires of his weird science experiment. I thought that was great.
I love how everyone is so blasé about
no
it
one gives
too.
a
Like
shit.
his mom comes in to like cut the cabbage with the eye right there, the brain, and she doesn't even recognize it, even when sparks are like flying at her and stuff.
She's like, "Oh,
Hilarious.
what's that?" Yeah, no, it's great. I also like the opening credits. They're a bit long, but when he's, just drawing scientific mumbo jumbo all over this like extremely detailed diagram of human musculature.
Yeah, I get a real kick out of it because I've been like studying a little bit, just ground floor level like circuitry stuff for It Stares Back, and I was recognizing like some of the patterning and stuff like in like the circuitry diagrams, and it's like just how hilariously wrong it is. It's just very funny.
I just think it's really funny how at the end of that segment when we finally see like when we pull back and we get the full shot and he's just got this big diagram, but there's just a photograph of his girlfriend's head taped on top of it.
like the proportions are wrong, so it's like
Right.
a little too small.
I will say that as much as I do find that opening sequence funny, it does
runs
largely I mean it's too long, but it also largely contributes to the movie feeling like a Reanimator knockoff, because the opening credits of Reanimator are like scrolling over like diagrams of human anatomy and musculature and skulls and eyeballs and shit. And then this movie, which is also about reanimating dead bodies, starts with opening credits of human musculature and anatomy and drawings and stuff.
I definitely agree with that. In some ways, I feel like it was poking fun at Reanimator a little bit, too.
I mean, yeah, it probably was, but also, like, Reanimator is not like a hyper serious film that needs to be poked at. Like, it's a horror comedy. Like, poking fun at another comedy that is already funny on its own it feels a bit strange to me.
Homage.
Like, it's homage is maybe what it was. I don't know for sure.
I mean, if it's a maybe, then it's not. I mean, that's the thing about homages, right? Like,
I think it was
necessarily,
making fun just because while Reanimator has its funny parts, it is very deadpan and takes itself very seriously at times. At least in Jeffrey Combs's character.
Yeah,
in his main character position.
I guess, but I think that he's a very comedic character in how deadpan he is, and Jeffrey in Frankenhooker is a poor imitation of Herbert West in Reanimator. I don't know, it's man, like, this movie's fun, but by the end of it, I'm just like, I just want to watch Reanimator now.
Yeah, which I've never seen. So.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Cleveland!
I know, I'm sorry.
You are in for a treat, my dude,
Good.
when we
All
eventually get around to Reanimator.
Most definitely.
And I think you'll definitely see those parallels.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame. I wish I could. Yeah, I would have more to say.
In a lot of ways, Frankenhooker is like a sexploitation Reanimator, and I think there is some decent homage to it. I think it's a little bit too close to Reanimator. Reanimator is such an incredible film. Like I said before, I think it's a nearly perfect film that when your imitation is this close to what you're imitating, it just draws attention to how much better.
Right, you could be watching.
I think in a lot of ways it stands on its own for the things it does differently, though. I think, the way this movie portrays the unique late 80s sleaze of New York is really unique to the time. The production design in a lot of the sets are really cool. I think of, for example, the bathroom where Jeffrey meets Zorro for the first time.
Yeah, no, the sets are pretty rad.
No, that's a great set, and I see where you're coming from, but also there are plenty of other films of the era that portray that unique New York sleaze that are not Reanimator knockoffs.
Sure, but I think this movie is kind of the end of that era. Right around this time, Giuliani came in and gentrified everything.
Absolutely.
All of those whorehouses and sleazy bars were replaced by McDonald's and Fuji, and and all these different.
Absolutely, it is very much the end of an era. But even something like comparing it to Frank Henenlotter's other stuff, like Basket Case, is a great film that I think also does a really good job of like immersing you in that same kind of New York sleaziness, exactly like what you're talking about. And I think I'm sure we'll eventually get around to doing an episode on Basket Case, but I think that Basket Case is a more narratively unique film that has a lot of the same hallmarks that Frankenhooker does, but it feels more of like its own entity rather than an homage or knockoff or whatever you want, or imitation or whatever you want to call it, of something like Reanimator or even Frankenstein. Frankenhooker has a lot of really good ideas. Even its premise of doing Frankenstein in Jersey, like Cleveland, you were saying earlier, is such a fucking golden idea, but it doesn't quite do enough to distinguish itself from, or rather, I should say, to truly distinguish itself from some of the films that it
wears on its sleeves.
Have you guys seen Weird Science at all?
I
was making that analogy earlier, but I think it's really apt because, in terms of plot devices, they are very similar movies.
I haven't seen
to the point where it's nearly a parody.
I haven't seen Weird Science, but I've heard that it has not aged very well.
No, it has not aged well. And this movie works for me on this viewing. I read it as kind of a parody of that movie and the misogyny of, reducing a full human being down to their body parts.
Sure.
And you get that especially in the third act.
And that is some of the stuff that I really like in Frankenhooker. And like I said, I haven't seen Weird Science, and I would like to see it just to sort of recontextualize Frankenhooker. But that's the stuff that I do think Frankenhooker does really well. Especially when Jeffrey's trying to figure out, like, how do I bring my girlfriend back? Like, I've got her head. How do I build her a new body. It's like, oh, I know, I can buy female body parts. It's very obvious, like, that is an extremely sleazy frame of mind.
Yeah.
Oh, or like when he's talking to the hamster too.
Oh yeah,
like,
the guinea pig.
then that
yeah.
weirded me the fuck out.
When he's
like,
testing the super crack on it, it's like, if you weren't a guinea pig, I'd bring you back to my house. But yeah, like the idea, especially like when he develops the super crack, he's like, I'm not killing anybody. I'm just presenting them with something that they want and that will end in them dying.
Well,
like,
the thing
I'm not a murderer.
The thing I got a kick out of too is he went through those mental hoops to try to justify it to himself, and then in the moment when they found all of the super crack,
Right.
you know, he tried to stop them. You know, he was like, "This is gonna kill you guys. You guys are gonna explode," and
Right.
they wouldn't listen.
Goddamn, when they all smoke the super crack and explode.
Great scene.
That is such a
I
fucking
think it's
funny
actually
scene.
excellently edited too. Like a lot of shots where you get, you know, the camera moving to people and without any sort of jump cut or anything, it goes to like a prosthetic blowing up, and it's very seamless in a lot of those edits.
I would say it's seamless for about 2/3 of them.
Yeah.
But even
Like,
the ones where you can see the
where it's
jump
obvious,
cut,
it's funny
in this
for
kind,
it.
yeah, in this kind of
Oh,
film, that's
yeah.
funny. That's the kind of
Like-
shit that I don't mind.
Like the ones where it's like very vividly, clearly like a dummy that's been like fucking loaded with fireworks. Like some of those were funnier to me. Like where you can
Oh
tell
my
it's
God.
like it's just a big mannequin. Like fuck,
And that
funny
scene
stuff.
and that scene goes
So
on for
goofy.
such a long time, and
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with it. Especially when we keep cutting to Zorro outside, like weakly trying to break down the door.
Because
Yeah.
we see him actually like break open the door and then it just closes again because like obviously someone was just like holding it on the other side.
Well, yeah,
and
and
he's
that's
such
the
a
thing.
big
Like
guy.
he's like a huge.
They couldn't even like fake it, right?
He's
so
like
funny.
a massive like bodybuilder physique
guy's
gentleman.
massive.
Yeah,
And
he's swole.
And you can tell that he's doing these very weak, like, shoulder bashes against the door because he's not supposed to break the door down, which I think is really funny. And then when he finally does, he just gets immediately hit in the head by
A flying head.
a flying hooker head that has just exploded. That is definitely my favorite scene. of the
Yeah,
movie
it's great.
because that is where it gets so over the top and ridiculous, and it's just absolutely delightful. And I wish there was more of that kind of shit in the movie.
There's enough of that for me since it is a short running time. Movie's under an
About
hour and a
80
half.
minutes,
Yeah, it's about 80 minutes. That all of that works super well for me. I mean, between that and the opening sequence where Elizabeth is run over by the lawnmower
pretty funny.
because he makes a remote controlled lawnmower that you can use. So she shows her dad it by starting it on and driving it straight into herself. I thought stuff like that was great.
Apparently, the lead who played the monster, she used to be a Playboy model.
Penthouse, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, apparently too. She mentions in the first scene at the family birthday that
Oh yeah, that weird plot point.
she was fat. Apparently she was wearing a fat suit during that scene.
I mean, she's
Fuck
very obviously wearing a fat suit.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
During that scene, I mean, it's mostly just around like her gut and her hips.
I
That's the-
didn't even notice.
It's
I
very
didn't
like
see.
because I mean, yeah, obviously later she is rebuilt with hooker body parts, you know, so she's now supposed to be skinny, but it's obviously the actress's actual body. Yeah, the fat suit is a little corny, especially because it's like late 80s, early 90s standards of fat where she's just like a little chonky around the hips and
Yeah.
belly, and it's like she's not really
exactly.
Yeah,
that was the
oh,
funniest
yeah.
part.
like
And it does a good job playing into like the unrealistic expectations of body image, but more than that, I like the little bit about her being a compulsive eater, and then once she comes back as Frankenhooker, she goes to the bar, which it has a funny name. It's something Cuervos. I think it's
No, it's Huevos something. It's like
Oh,
it's just big balls.
It's like
right?
Grande Huevos.
Yeah, Grande Huevos.
Huevos,
which is great. But
which is not even proper Spanish syntax. But
Correct.
But she there's pretzels on the bar, and she just goes ham on them because the compulsive eater stuff in her is still
I
there.
did think it was really funny during the dinner scene where he's just like talking to her head, and he has all of the pictures of what she could look like after he puts her back together, and it's just obviously like Playboy and Penthouse cutouts with pictures of her head glued on top, just like fully nude. He's like, you could look like this, or you could look like this, or even this.
Yeah, that was great.
Really funny.
I think she does a great job in
Yeah,
this
she's
role.
good.
She's awesome.
She kicks ass.
Honestly, she's probably the best actor in the film.
Yeah, I would
say.
agree.
I would too.
She has these goofy ass facial tics. Since she was remade from the parts of all these hookers, she just repeats all these lines that the hookers had said earlier in the movie. And she kind of goes out and about killing all the men who try to take advantage of her.
That's my thing though. Like I wish that started earlier, because really
They could have done more with that.
She just kills like 2 dudes.
Yeah, but I mean the whole
finds
scene
her.
with the guy that looks like a mix between Danny DeVito and Mr. Magoo, I thought was
it's great.
hilarious.
Yeah, it's great. It was hilarious.
That's
Wanted
my
more
point.
of it. Yeah.
That's my point. Give me more of that. Mm-hmm. Like, don't give me that over halfway through the film and then have one other person die afterwards.
Very quickly in the hallway.
And then that be it. Like, oh, I guess there's 2 other people, because she also goes to like
the bar.
Grande Huevos, and the dude like starts going down on her in the corner, and we just see like smoke and his feet kicking, and then he's dead.
Yeah, and there's like 12 other things going on in that scene.
That's what I'm saying.
Counts.
Like I wish they would get to that point earlier in the film so we could get more of that really goofy shit. Like, I'll make a comparison to another similar genre sexploitation film, Call Girl of Cthulhu. In that, it's kind of a similar premise, but there's this awesome montage of like the Lovecraftian call girl like killing a bunch of people, and it goes on for a while, and it happens like halfway through the film, and I was just wanting more of that in this. Like there's almost too much preamble to the actual Frankenhooker. Like, the movie's about Frankenhooker. Give me Frankenhooker, you know?
I definitely agree with that. I definitely wanted more. I was thankful that it was split up a little bit into scenes that I did enjoy, like the super crack scene and the opening helped me carry myself through it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it was a little long on the draw. I think
Honestly, I just think that first act could be trimmed down a little bit and have more stuff in the third act, because like I definitely would not want the super crack scene to be any shorter or be removed.
No, it's perfect.
It just needs to happen sooner. Like, cut down some of the preamble in the first act, get us to that super crack scene earlier, then get us to the Frankenhooker sooner, and then give us more of Frankenhooker being Frankenhooker.
Yeah.
And I think that would help the structure of the film a lot. And honestly, I would have been more curious to see more of the like weird Lovecraftian flesh beasts at the end. The ones that kill Zorro.
Those are great.
He just gathers up all of the body parts of the exploded hookers and just like puts them in his grape Kool-Aid in the garage. And then when Zorro shows up and cuts off his head, he gets attacked by just like these like titty monsters, like titties with like hands and like lips with like legs and shit like that. And
reminded me of like Society almost.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of those like flesh beast monsters,
I was thinking
I thought they were fantastic though. Really well designed.
Yeah,
surprisingly.
I liked that, but I feel like that scene was too short. Unleash the flesh beasts sooner, you know? Like, give me more of Frankenhooker and the flesh beasts wreaking havoc. It just felt like
I wonder how much of the structure of this movie with that kind of stuff is due to its low budget. Because I feel like the scenes where we have the most use of budget are the flashiest scenes.
Yeah.
And those are usually fairly brief, somewhat to a fault sometimes. You know, I think the super crack scene and that ending scene, and even the makeup effects on Frankenhooker and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure the budget has something to do with it, but like when it comes to the flesh beasts, like you've got those props, like you've got those monsters, like you could definitely do more with them without raising your budget too much, you know? Like the props are built. You just film more with them, have them do more stuff, but I'm sure it did come down to budget. Do you know what this movie's budget is?
I want to say it was like
Pretty low.
1 or
obviously.
2 million.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. And I appreciate movies like this for that, you know. Like they're obviously not trying to be masterpieces of film. It's that exploitation, you know, genre, whether it's blaxploitation or sexploitation or whatever, where part of the charm is doing what you can with very little money. And I appreciate that a lot. So like the budget doesn't bother me.
Same.
I just wish there was a little bit more of that kookiness, you know? I think that it almost gets there, but it's still, by the time the credits roll, it just leaves me wanting a little bit more.
I think that's what bothered me about it more than anything else is how close it got for me. Like, it was almost there. You know, it was almost just really fucking great.
See, I think unlike a lot of, I want to call them gimmick horror movies, where they kind of play off the title, essentially.
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. Gimmick isn't necessarily
I think this movie delivers a lot more, you know, and it hits a lot more than most of those other ones, just because you do have scenes like the super crack scene or the flesh beast scene or even the very finale, which I want to talk about a little bit, where Zorro cuts off Jeffrey's head and he gets put on a...
Well, I think we're saying the same thing, Ben. Like, I think it is much better than a lot of those other like schlocky films, and it was so close to being great for it, and it didn't get all the way there.
And like talking about a film playing off its gimmick, like the title is Frankenhooker, and Frankenhooker doesn't make an appearance until like 45 minutes into an 80-minute movie, 50 minutes. Like, that's my problem, is not the gimmick, but it's just that give me more of the gimmick.
Yeah.
Give me more of the gimmick, you know? Like, cut out the filler, give me more of the super crack stuff, more of Frankenhooker, more of Zorro's bad acting.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
Yeah. But we can move into the...
Yeah. All I meant by that is I think while I did want more, I think it does give more than average for that stuff, thankfully. And I think that's what separates it from those bad gimmick movies. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the very ending. You know, Jeffrey gets his head cut off. As he explained earlier, the serum that he made was estrogen only based or something like that.
Yeah, it's estrogen based, so
And-
it only works on female
Yeah,
parts.
so Elizabeth, or the reanimated version of Elizabeth, puts him together, but in a female body, and he freaks out, and that's the end of the movie.
She just puts his head on top of a hooker's body.
Yeah.
Which is pretty funny, and I think it's poetic in a way that after this whole time he's so obsessed with rebuilding his dead girlfriend in the perfect body and getting all of her measurements perfect and everything, that it ends with him against his will having his head put onto a woman's body, and he does not like it. He even says, "Where's my Johnson?" I think that is funny, and I think
it was a solid goof.
It's a solid goof, and I do think it is one of the things that I think does separate Frankenhooker from some other more exploitative sexploitation films. and sort of giving some of the power back to the female characters. So I appreciated that. I did think it ends rather abruptly after that, though.
Yeah.
The ending doesn't bother me too much. I just wish it got to that stuff sooner.
I think it's a fun ending. There's a couple things I want to talk about briefly. About the making of this movie before we jump into ratings.
Sure.
One thing is this movie came out of a meeting Henenlotter had with a producer where he was pitching a movie and the producer was like, this is a great idea, but we can't sell it. Do you have anything else? And Henenlotter didn't have anything else. So on the spot, he made up the story of Frankenhooker.
Wow, that makes me wonder what he pitched to the guy that they couldn't sell, that this was the alternative, and the producer said, oh yeah, that's the one we're gonna go with.
Yeah, and so he just pitched like half of the movie, throwing in more and more ridiculous stuff, and the producer just kept laughing and laughing at it, and he was like, what are we calling this? And he's like, Frankenhooker, no, Frankenhooker. And he's like, brilliant. And like a week later, he got sent a contract to make the movie.
That's pretty good. That's big dick energy.
And
honestly, he should have gone farther, pushed it even farther. It's so close to being in trauma territory. It's so close. It's just not quite there. He should have tried to sell this shit to fucking Lloyd Kaufman.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is this movie was released, I think the company that put it out they specialized in exploitation and like softcore movies. And it makes a lot of sense. You know, it's weird because Henenlotter is known for his 80s sleaze. But this is a different kind of sleaze for him that I think is interesting. The other thing I wanted to mention is after this movie, Henenlotter put out Basket Case 3, and then for the longest time, he was on a hiatus from making movies for about 10, 20 years. And that was because he started a movie imprint called Something Weird Videos. And they released older grindhouse exploitation, sexploitation movies all across the country. So a lot of these more obscure exploitation and sexploitation movies got, distribution in rental places, in Tower Records, in places like that where they wouldn't normally get any recognition at all. Blood Freak was a big release with them, which is one of the first...
Fuck me.
Yeah, Blood Freak. Yeah, the turkey one was one of them.
Blood Freak, the turkey one.
Blood Feast also, which is like the originator of the gore splatter movie in American horror. There were a lot of huge titles that just didn't get any recognition until they put them out on DVD. So I just wanted to give him props for that too, because it's a super important thing that they did. So
I've got a lot of respect for Frank Henenlotter. Like I think for me, Frankenhooker falls short of what I think it could be, but like I really like Basket Case. Like I mentioned before, I would love to talk about Basket Case on this show at some point, and knowing that he stopped making films so he could give older, more obscure exploitation films a chance to be noticed. That's a pretty fucking baller move, and I have mad respect for that. And, Blood Freak is a beast in and of itself.
A turkey beast.
If you go back and listen to our Thanksgiving
just
episode,
watch the last
in of itself.
Watch the last 5 or 10 minutes of Blood Freak so you can see the legendary director interview right at the end of the movie where he's talking about the dangers of drugs when he's chain smoking a cigarette and he just busts into a long coughing fit for a solid 2 minutes.
Go back and listen to our first Thanksgiving episode to hear my individual review of Blood Freak, and you'll get the full experience. But good for Frank Henenlotter Do we want to rate?
Yeah, we might as well.
You can start, Ben,
Okay,
since it's your pick.
Yeah, so I actually didn't enjoy it quite as much on repeat viewings as I did before. I think this is a more minor movie in Henenlotter's filmography. I would definitely put, Brain Damage and Basket Case above it, but I do think it's still a very fun, very entertaining movie, and a great movie to watch drunk with friends. It has enough that you'll put people into a state of surprise by it. No one's going to expect super crack. No one's going to expect any of that type of stuff.
Expects super crack.
I actually wasn't bothered by the main actor. I recognized him from movies like Street Trash, which he starred in. He was very flat and deadpan, but that didn't bother me too much. Who stood out more, though, was definitely the woman who played Frankenhooker. I thought she did a fantastic job. Super silly, super fun. I thought the effects were great. Guido Freddie Mercury, fantastic. Overall, it's a lot of fun. It's not a perfect movie by any means, but I think it's cut above your standard schlock. So I'm going to give it a solid 4 out of 5.
Yeah, no, above average. I think 2.5 is average. I'm going to give it a 3. I did not like the lead. And there are a few little things, here and there that were kind of obnoxious. And again, like, not enough Frankenhooker. But, no, other than that, like, again, there were some fantastic scenes in there, very funny. And the film got much funnier as soon as I started actually drinking. That helped a lot. That helped a great deal. With this movie, I do recommend starting this film drunk. That will help. When was it? I think it was like when he was going about like picking up the hookers, where I was just like, I'm too sober for this, and I just had to go into the freezer and grab those Rumple Mints. Like it wasn't doing it for me until then.
No, I can feel that.
Yeah. So and that's normally not my thing, like at all. But it felt somewhat required. But yeah, no, that 3. I enjoyed it. There's some parts that really made me laugh. I wanted more from it.
Yeah, I'm very much in your camp, Cleveland. The last time I saw this film was when Ben and I were freshmen living in the dorm together. That was when Ben introduced it to me, and I remembered very little of it, which means that at the time I was probably drunk and or high, which would explain my previous rating. I was going back through my Letterboxd, and last time I watched it, I gave it a strong 4 out of 5, but unfortunately, this time it didn't quite reach that level for me. Maybe because I'm a little bit more familiar with Frank Henenlotter's filmography and what he's capable of, or maybe I saw this before I saw Reanimator too. I can't remember for sure.
You've aged a little bit since you were a freshman.
Yeah, no,
you've matured.
Definitely.
So,
I do think that this film has plenty of value as a fun exploitation film. It's less than 90 minutes, so I wouldn't even say that it wears out its welcome at all. It's a fun movie that you can, just sit down and enjoy. I'd say it's best enjoyed with friends, probably under the influence of something. But it's fun, and it's got a lot of good things going for it, but I think it doesn't quite go as far as I want it to, and it doesn't do quite enough to distinguish itself from something like Reanimator, which has such a similar premise. So I'm gonna echo you, Cleveland, and give it a 3 out of 5 pods. Not a bad film by any means. A fun, schlocky, enjoyable ride. Worth checking out, I would say. So that'll give Frankenhooker an average of 3.3 out of 5 pods. Have some fun with it.
I forgot to mention during the review that the lead actor was the main actor in Street Trash, which I'm sure we'll get to eventually. That movie is
That's
more
a film I have not seen.
mean-spirited than this one. It's all about killer homeless people who become like zombie mutants after taking some evil version of drugs.
That sounds really fun.
It is fun.
Is that also a Frank Henenlotter film?
It's not Henenlotter, but it's very Henenlotter influenced. And that was part of the reason why this guy was cast even, because Henenlotter loved the movie. I just wanted to give it a quick shout out because I would definitely recommend his performance in that over this.
Yeah, that's something I'd be interested to see. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything. I know he's got a bit part in King of New York, but it's been a long time since I've seen that movie. So I would like to know if he's got more chops than what he displays in this movie. Now it's time for a word from our sponsor.
Oh, it sure is. Here we are once again with no prepper. I mean, yeah, we prepared. Ship. All right, let's do it. Let's do a little sponsory.
Do you need the
time.
copy?
I always need something. Yeah, this week is sponsored by Don't Drink This Biohazard energy drink. The good folks at Section 92B have graciously sponsored us with the new beverage that they want to unleash upon the public and have sweeping the streets. Biohazard, do not drink this, or whatever the fuck I called it a minute ago.
That was the one.
That's the one. Yeah, it sure is a drink, an energy drink, and don't mind the sludgy texture of it. It's just part of the fun. Looking to enhance your soccer game? Enhance your soccer game and your sports time with Biohazard Do Not Drink, the energy drink. And it says their catchphrase is release the flesh beast. So
So can I drink this?
Well, you see, this is the confusing part, right? It says Biohazard Do Not Drink, the energy drink.
Right. Will it give me energy if I drink it?
It says it's good for your sports game.
Oh. Well, I'll be sure to bring a whole bushel full at my next sports game.
Excellent. Do love a good bushel of energy drink.
Thanks, Biohazard Do Not Drink this energy drink. I look forward to drinking it at my next sport.
Let's release the flesh beast.
Get back in your cage, flesh beast. All right, Ben, do you have anything else for us?
Yeah, I do have a hot take corner if we have time.
Uh-oh!
You find yourself in a strange room, an academic circle. Every point you bring up is followed with a counterpoint. All you can see is disagreement. Nothing makes sense here. You have entered the hot take zone.
My hot take of the week is a pretty spicy one, I think.
Okay.
So having characters that make dumb decisions in horror movies and are fodder for being killed is too often an excuse for poor writing in horror movies, and part of the reason horror movies aren't respected as intelligent movies a lot of times.
I mean, yes. I fully agree. Hush is a great example of doing it right.
I about half agree with that.
Word.
I
guess there's room for both.
The part of that I definitely agree with is I think stuff like that does make horror less respected as a genre and, you know, throws it into that category of genre films where it's not like a real serious film, like, oh, it's a genre film. I agree with that. That being said, I think that like every genre of film, there's a lot of subgenres within horror, and having stupid characters that make stupid decisions is not necessarily bad depending on what kind of horror film you're making.
I think the difference is, it's mainly used in slasher movies to give reason for people to die where they wouldn't normally do it. It's one thing if they make, you know, an adrenaline rush decision that isn't the most well-advised or well thought out. It's another thing for them to just go completely away from logic to you know, conveniently agree with the plot.
And I think a lot of that depends heavily on the logic of the film in question. Nothing makes a character's dumb logic stand out more than if the film is not dumb enough to match that character's logic. You know what I mean? And I think that in a lot of slasher films, you're right. That is the reason that characters get killed where otherwise they wouldn't. Because how many times you've been watching a horror film and been being like, "Oh my god, don't go in the fucking spooky house. Don't go in the fucking house, you idiot." Well, if the person in question shared that logic, they would turn around and be like, "You know what? I'm not going to go in the spooky house," and they would leave, and you wouldn't have a horror movie.
That would be like the best twist ending for a film.
Well,
I'm sure it's been
just
done.
like 20
the
minutes
fact that
20
you
minutes
even
into a
put
movie.
that decision in the movie, in your movie, is just an excuse for bad writing. If you can't figure out a better way of, getting them into those positions to begin with.
Yeah, like I said, it depends on the film and the logic of the film. If you look at something like It Follows, like we've talked about on the show, and that we all gave very high praise. It's one of the only films that's in our perfectly scored
Golden Pod.
Golden Pod category. That's one of those films where characters making stupid decisions would really hurt the film.
Oh God.
Because it is a higher concept horror film that is extremely well written. The characters feel realistic. Their decisions make sense for who those characters are. And if you threw in a something where like one of the characters tried to go fist fight the entity or something, like ran up and tried to throw a punch, that would break the film. It would be like, that's such a fucking stupid decision. Like, why would you do that? Whereas in something like a Friday the 13th sequel, having some dumb broy jock character try to go fist fight Jason, like, yeah, that's an equally stupid decision that ends up getting the character killed. But in that kind of movie, it doesn't piss me off. Because it's a Friday the 13th movie, it's a dumb slasher movie, and you need to have the dumb, unlikable characters do things that get them killed. I don't think it's necessarily a lazy writing decision unless the film is otherwise written well. It totally depends on the story you're trying to tell.
See, but I think that proves my point. You're giving an excuse for bad writing. If the rest of the movie is written poorly, you're okay with bad decisions being made because the rest of the movie is written poorly.
Are badly written films inherently unenjoyable?
Yeah, like or schlocky films, and you suggested Frankenhooker.
You are of all of us on the podcast the strongest proponent of a bad film being successful if it's entertaining. So, does bad writing in a film inherently make a film less entertaining?
No. I think bad writing, you can have bad writing in a good movie, even in an enjoyable movie, even. The thing is, at its core, it's still bad writing, though.
Sure. Okay. If that's our qualifier, then yeah, I guess I can agree with that. I will say again that I do think that things like that are what make a lot of people write off the horror genre.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I do enjoy a lot of those films, and I do think that I think it's okay. I think that a lot of people who write off the genre too are probably never going to find access to it for the most part. I could be wrong about that, but I don't know. I think especially like in the past decade or so, like those stigmas have sort of started to fall away. I could be wrong.
No, I think so. I've said before on the show, and I'll stand by it. I think that in the last 8 years or so, we have started entering a new horror renaissance, which I'm super on board for. But that I don't think that takes away the value of the super dumb, corny, fun horror movies where the characters, the inherently usually unlikable characters, make stupid decisions that end up getting them killed. I don't think that reduces the value of the horror genre, and I think it's. If that's the kind of thing that makes you overlook horror, then so be it. I think you're kind of small-minded if that's the way you think about it, That's not to say that there are not really bad movies where the characters make bad decisions and overall I have a bad time watching it, but I don't think the characters making dumb decisions that get them killed are what make me enjoy or not enjoy a movie. It's there's so much more to it than
Well,
that.
and I think at its core, we excuse bad decisions and bad writing in general in horror movies more than most other genres, because even when they're bad, a lot of times they can be entertaining.
Yes.
You can't have a badly written comedy movie that's entertaining nearly as much.
Correct.
For example,
and-
if jokes don't work, they're not going to work. The movie isn't going to work. If you have a bad horror movie that at least has fun spectacle to it, you'll at least be entertained by it.
I agree 100%, and I've brought that up on the show before, that I think that the horror genre has a very special luxury of being one of the only genres that a super low quality awful horror film can be just as entertaining as a really well done horror film. I think the only other genre that even comes close to horror is action movies. They share that same sort of luxury where they can be really bad and stupid and still be extremely entertaining.
So yeah, I think in terms of spiciness, that takes kind of I would say it's a sriracha.
I would say that's a habanero. It makes my mouth tingle a little bit, but it's not making me sweat too terribly. Like I said, I about halfway agree with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How spicy was it, Cleve?
I don't know, little pepper, little paprika, nothing much.
Paprika isn't spicy at all.
It's a
not
spice.
not very spicy.
But it's a spice, so yep.
It's a color that you put in your food to make your food red.
Yep.
So a very non-spicy take. Okay.
Yeah. Well, maybe I don't know, the little red pepper packets you get off a pizza.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
A little red pepper.
Red pepper flakes.
Yeah. No, that's spicy, but it gets a little something.
Little kick.
It's a good addition to the pizza. It's a good addition to the podcast. A little good conversation. Little pepper flake.
All right.
Little red pepper bits.
Well, with that, we will bring this episode to a close. Next week, it's Cleveland's choice.
Yes, sir. The Ministry of Fear.
That's correct. The Fritz Lang film. But yeah, one of Fritz Lang's 100,000 films that he did in his career.
Yeah.
One that I have not seen.
I have not seen it either. It must be a horror movie because it has fear in it, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Sure might. I have seen it. I enjoyed it thoroughly. But it's been a long time since I've seen it, and I think it could be. I remember it has some ideas that I think at the very least hold up quite well. It's got some really cool, some fun concepts in it.
I like Fritz Lang. I'm excited. This might be the oldest film we've ever talked about on the podcast.
That's what happens when you bring me on.
We have not had. I think the farthest we've been back before is like the 60s, maybe.
Boys, you just wait.
We had the 50s with Bucket of Blood.
That's right. Yep, we had the late 50s with Bucket of Blood. Yeah, that's the farthest we've been back before.
Well, as long as I'm sticking around, we'll be doing Cabinet of Caligari and all the rest of it for sure.
Yeah, tune in next week for a blast from the past. Fritz Lang's The Ministry of Fear. Until next time, if you like the show and you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, then go on Apple Podcasts and hit those 5 stars and leave us a review, or wherever else you listen to your podcast. Do the thing.
Help us save Clotilda.
Yeah, we have...
Or don't. You should. You should. That was a joke. That was a joke.
No, we want Clotilda back. If you want to get Clotilda back, we need 10 reviews on Apple Podcasts. #save Clotilda. Follow us on Twitter @PodPeoplePod for the Twitter things. Follow us on Letterboxd for the list of all the films we've talked about on the show, our average ratings, links to those episodes. If you haven't dived into our back catalog before, that's a good way to do it.
Just dive on in there.
Just dive on in. Follow me on Twitter at Mr. Van Awesome, whatever.
All right. Yeah, you can follow me at Light Arc Studios, doing on the old Twitter, the Twitter machine, and then you can also find my artwork on ArtStation under Iron Prism or Cleveland Mosher, Mosher, for those wondering. And then it's about it. And keep your ears to the rails, for it stares back as we continue to get that fucker put out. All right.
Yeah, and I'm at Mr. Sheets on Twitter. Eat your vegetables.
Nice.
Well, we love you. We appreciate you.
We do.
We'll be back next week. Don't cry because we're leaving. Smile because it happened.
We'll be back.
Until next time, what happened to my Johnson?
Hey, where'd it go?